This is Research Like a Pro, episode 336, England Probate Court and Manor Records with Jessica Morgan. Welcome to Research Like a Pro, a genealogy podcast about taking your research to the next level, hosted by Nicole Dyer and Diana Elder, accredited genealogist professional. Diana and Nicole are the mother-daughter team at FamilyLocket.com and the authors of Research Like a Pro, a genealogist guide. With Robin Worthland, they also co-authored the companion volume, Research Like a Pro with DNA. Join Diana and Nicole as they discuss how to stay organized, make progress in their research, and solve difficult cases. Let's go! Today's episode is sponsored by newspapers.com. Hi to everyone listening. Welcome to Research Like a Pro. Hi, Diana. Mom.
Hi, Nicole. How are you doing today?
I'm great. What have you been working on and reading lately?
Well, I just finished reading The Genealogist Guide to Researching Tax Records by Carol Cook Darrow and Susan Winchester. So it's just a thin little book. You were the one that clued me into it, and it goes all through different types of tax records. And I use those all the time in my research, but there were some tax records there that I'd never heard of before. So it was pretty fun, and I love how she gives some ideas about how to find these. And at the very end, the summary just says basically, you're just going to have to reach out and figure out where these are, because they could be any place in archives, they could be digitized, or just in the repository. So it's up to us to figure out where the tax records are. But it's such a handy little book to give you ideas.
Great recommendation. Our Research Like a Pro webinar series for January is going to be presented by Susan McKee, who is a genealogist specializing in Irish research and is a member of the Seattle Genealogical Society. So this will be a fun class. She'll be talking about her case study using Irish naming conventions to discover the family of Thomas Delaney in mid to late 1800s in Ireland. So we hope you'll join us for our Research Like a Pro webinar series for 2025. And the topics she'll cover are Ireland, Queen's County, Irish Naming Convention, Catholic Parish Registers, Civil Registration, and the 1901 Census of Ireland. Also, we have the Research Like a Pro with DNA study group coming up in February 2025, and you can register now. And if you'd like to be a peer group leader, please let us know, email us, or apply on our website. And be sure to join our weekly Family Locket newsletter that comes out every Monday to receive news about new blog posts, podcast episodes, and any coupons we have running. And as for upcoming conferences, we'll look forward to seeing many of you at Roots Tech in March 6th through 8th.
Well, thank you for going through those. We are excited to have Jessica back. Jessica, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thank you very much.
We had Jessica with us for our previous episode, number 335, where we talked all about different types of records in England besides the traditional baptism, marriage, and burial records that we generally use. And today in this episode, we are going to talk about more of those records that we can use to either add more context to our ancestors' life or to further their ancestry and discover more people on the family tree. So first of all, let's talk a bit about wills and probate. This is something that we use all the time in any type of research in the United States. We use this as much as we possibly can. And I'm so curious to learn about what wills and probate in England might look like. I do know that not everyone would have a will, and it was uncommon for the average farmer or laborer to go through the expense of creating it because, they usually didn't have as much property or wealth to bequeath. But I have heard that many people can be mentioned in a will, even if they are not the ones who actually wrote it. Let's divide this up into time frames and talk about 1858 to more current. And so, Jessica, what can you tell us about the wills and probate from 1858, and why is that a special year?
So that's a special year because that is when the probate registry in the British government took charge of proving wills and administrations. So before that, it was the responsibility of the Church of England. So when the British government took charge, they created an index, which is called the National Probate Calendar. So if you have an ancestor who you suspect left a will post 1858, then it's really easy to find out if they did and how much they left and some good information like that, because you can just go to the National Probate Calendar, which is a database that's available on Ancestry and many major genealogy websites. And the probate calendar includes the following information that you can find out: the name of the deceased, along with their address, and the date and place of the probate, and the name of the principal heirs, and the total value of the property. So again, this is searchable on Ancestry. If you just Google National Probate Calendar Ancestry, you'll get to it. And then you can use the information found in the calendar to order your ancestor's original will through the probate registry, which is www.gov.uk/search-will-probate. Basically, if you Google probate registry England, you should be able to get to there. So you can put in that order using the information you got from the National Probate Calendar, and copies typically are very inexpensive. I believe they cost like £1.50 sterling. So yeah, definitely worth checking out.
Thank you for giving us that resource. And in the blog post you wrote about this, you have an image of a sample page, and I noticed that it does give you some details like dates and places and some family relationships and occupations, so you can really see if this matches up what you know about your person in that calendar. So that looks like a really helpful resource.
When I was researching Thomas Bradley, I ordered his will and it was listed in the calendar, and then I ordered it. I don't remember how much it cost, but I just remember being so excited when it arrived and transcribing that and learning so many things, who he had left his money to, and he left like a chair to his servant and like left his cottage to his grandson. It was really neat. And of course, we want to find any of the records we can about our ancestors, but I especially love finding wills. Well, Jessica, tell us more about pre-1858 wills.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, before 1858, that's when wills were held by the Church of England, specifically by the church's ecclesiastical courts. So there's a certain hierarchy within the courts that can be a bit complicated and feel a little overwhelming, but really handy map on Family Search. If you just Google like Family Search map, it will take you to a page on Family Search that has a map of England, and you can type in your parish name, and that can give you the outline of your parish. And then there's a tab for jurisdictions, and it can give you the jurisdictions and specifically the court that your ancestors' will would have been under, given the parish that they lived in at the time. But just a quick breakdown of how the courts work. The top court was the prerogative court, which is basically York or Canterbury. York covered most of northern England. Canterbury typically covered either all of England or southern England. Below that is diocese. And then below that is the archdeaconry or the peculiar court. And peculiar courts were kind of more of those unusual boundaries that maybe kind of fell out or straddled between two counties. That's usually what that covered. But again, if you go to Family Search Map, you should be able to quickly narrow down the name of the ecclesiastical court that your parish belonged to. From there, you can be able to go on to the Family Search catalog and search that court's name in the Family Search catalog. Then you should be able to find out if the Family History Library has wills regarding that court. Because again, the wills aren't categorized under parish. If you search for your ancestor's parish name, you're not going to get a will collection. You're only going to get it under the court that your ancestor's parish belonged to. But yeah, you can get a lot of really good information from wills, and they carry very similar information that you'd expect to find in like American wills, like names of relatives, names of heirs that are inheriting items or property, value of property, just a lot of really good, helpful things that, again, if you have an ancestor who left a will in England, which is definitely less common than over the US, where practically everyone had a will. Again, less common in England, but if you do have an ancestor who had a will, then you can get a lot of good genealogy information from that. And again, just using that Family Search map is a great way to track down what the name of the court that your ancestor's will should be found under.
Oh, fantastic resource. I have used that map for civil registration districts and things like that, but I haven't used it for the court jurisdictions, and all of the jurisdictions in England are somewhat complicated. It's not super straightforward, so that resource is very helpful.
I agree. That is the best map for jurisdictions for England. I wish every country had one like that, or the Family Search had something like that.
I know. Yeah.
Well, there's a fun example in the blog post you wrote about a will that was really early. It's for 1656. And when I first looked at that, I thought, I can't read this that well because it's written really fancy old handwriting. And I actually put it into AI and asked Claude 3.5 Sonnet to transcribe it. And it did a great job reading that. I was so impressed. But just a couple of things that it said, it does give so many relationships, talking about the brother and the wife and the son. So, these wills are just so well worth your time to track down. And this one was fun because it was nuncupative, which means it was spoken, not written. And probably because he was too ill to write a formally witnessed will. So I'm always fascinated to check out the wills. Well, something else happens when somebody dies, and that is a death duty. So, what is this all about in England?
So death duties can be really valuable because essentially they were taxes on estates of the deceased when they were probated. So the wills were then copied and created into abstracts, then saved into the death duty records. They basically are abstracts of what the original will said. And the reason why these can be so valuable is because there are places in England where the wills have been destroyed and do not exist. For example, if your ancestor lived in Devon, Somerset, or Cornwall before 1858, those Church of England recorded wills were destroyed during the bombings of World War II. So those are no longer available. However, the death duties, which were the taxes on those wills, which created these abstracts of those wills, they do exist for those counties. So it's a very important resource if your ancestor is from, again, Devon, Somerset, or Cornwall. So there's different taxes that were taken out. So there's different types of death duties. There's like the legacy duty, which covered personal property, succession duty, which covered land, and estate duty covered everything the deceased owns. So if you see those terms, that's basically what they mean. But more detailed records can be found after 1812. And National Archives has a great guide on how to look for death duties. And Find My Past has an index to death duties, which covers 1796 to 1903. So very good if your ancestor belonged to an ecclesiastical court where the wills had been destroyed.
What a great record replacement. And this is so helpful to know that the wills were copied over and kept with the death duty records.
Right. Well, let's move on to something that is similar to wills and probate, and that's court records. And this is something that I like to use in the US. And I think it's really interesting that a lot of the US terminology for court records, as we go through these, they'll sound familiar, came from England, from these original courts. So let's start off talking about the quarter sessions, and maybe you can give us some ideas about what that is and what kind of records could be in that type of a court.
Yeah, absolutely. So, quarter sessions, we'll talk about those first. Basically, there are different tiers, different types of courts that handled different types of court cases. So, the first one is quarter sessions, which date back as far back as the 13th century and most recently as 1972. So, again, a big swath of time. And so, the quarter sessions was a court that was held 4 times a year and basically covered everyday business or grievances. Anyone could attend the quarter session. So those are kind of the most popular go-to records for ancestors because regardless of the social status, anyone could attend this court. So you can get a variety of different records from quarter sessions. Basically, it includes lists of justices and bailiffs and constables. It contains indictments and depositions, bonds and complaints, testimonials, licenses for various occupations. Like if your ancestor was a tavern keeper or an alehouse keeper, you could find a license for them within the quarter sessions. Removal orders for paupers, if they needed to be evicted back to their home parish because they couldn't provide for themselves. Just a whole litany of different things can be found in quarter session records. It's just a very really interesting resource. So quarter sessions records are typically kept in the archive of their respective county, and you can use the keyword field in the family search catalog and search for the county where your ancestor's parish was. So basically the county name and quarter sessions. If you use that phrase, so like Shropshire quarter sessions, then the family search catalog can give you everything that that county has in their own quarter sessions. And you can check out if your ancestor is listed in there. Find My Past also has a good searchable database covering Northamptonshire, Shropshire, Surrey, Wiltshire, and Yorkshire. They have quarter sessions for all of those counties. Again, it's a very large court system that covered everyday incidences from everyone regardless of class. So that's a worthwhile resource to check out for your ancestor.
Oh, great. Thanks for telling us about those. I really had no idea. And looking at the catalog, I see that there are quarter session papers for West Kent, for where those Kelseys are. So I'm finding there's going to be a lot of resources if I want to dig into that family. How interesting.
Wow. I am just going to have to dig into this. I kind of want to go look at the ones that are on Find My Past just for ideas of what the records contain. But the ones I want are for Lincolnshire because that's where Thomas Bradley was listed in the newspaper as being in the quarter sessions because he was accused of manslaughter. So I'm going to have to go dive into the archives there. Lincolnshire archives. Here I come. Well, let's talk about Chancery Court. What is that and how is that a little bit different from quarter sessions?
Yeah, well, Nicole, if you have ancestors who are more on the wealthy side, if they had like inheritance or land, you might find them in the Chancery Court as well, because the Chancery Court basically was a nationwide court that covered disputes over inheritance, lands, and debts. So it's specifically like for the wealthy class, the Chancery Court was concerned with. In 1875, it was absorbed into the High Court of Justice. But before that point, Chancery Proceedings belonged to the Chancery Court. The proceedings were sorted into bundles by the name of the chancellor involved, and it has a lot of good information. It has affidavits, depositions, petitions, court funds, all sorts of really good information. So if you have an ancestor that you know had a certain amount of wealth or property, Chancery Court records are a very good resource to check out. They are held at the National Archives, and there is an index to Chancery records covering 1386 to 1558 in an ancestry database entitled England and Wales Criminal Registers. So if you search the England and Wales Criminal Registers database on Ancestry, then you'll get some Chancery Court records inserted in there as well. So yeah, very good resource if you have ancestors who came from a certain amount of wealth.
Oh, that makes sense that they would have a different court for that kind of thing. And it's good that there's an index. And I'm curious how many names in there are indexed or if it's like an OCR type of thing. I'll have to go check it out.
Yeah, for sure.
Now let's have a word from our sponsor, newspapers.com. Imagine curling up in a cozy chair, scrolling through newspapers.com and discovering a family member smiling back at you in a photo you've never seen before. Give the genealogy lover in your life a gift subscription to newspapers.com and make this a reality. They'll break through genealogy brick walls with access to hundreds of years of wedding announcements, obituaries, family stories, and so much more. There's always something new to discover on newspapers.com with a growing archive of over 1 billion pages from the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and beyond. Long after other gifts are forgotten, a newspapers.com gift subscription will continue to delight. Make the past the best present ever. For listeners of today's show, newspapers.com is offering 20% off gift subscriptions for a limited time. Just use the code FamilyLocket at checkout.
Okay, well, our next type of court is the Assize Court. So tell us more about that.
Yep, so the Assize Court is a really interesting one. It goes back to the 13th century and existed up to 1972. And they were basically periodic criminal courts that heard cases that were too serious for the quarter sessions. So if your ancestor appears in these court records, it's for a very good reason. They were replaced by the Crown Court along with quarter sessions in 1972. There's different jurisdictions within the Assize Court that covers different counties, but the Assize Court, if you go into the records themselves, you will find prison books, basically names of prisoners with their verdict and sentence. You'll have order books, like orders made by the judges, sums paid to sheriffs, you'll have indictments, you'll have depositions, even some criminal biographies can be found in there, and as well as appeal registers. And many of the Assize Court records are held at the National Archives, and you can also access them through that ancestry database I mentioned before, the England and Wales Criminal Registers, and also the website, the Old Bailey, Bailey, is a great database covering those criminal court cases. So again, it's always worth taking a look if you suspect your ancestor was not very well behaved. Their name may appear in the Assize Court. And again, that is for the serious crimes. So you might uncover some very interesting information through that.
That's helpful. And there's some good resources you mentioned. Thank you.
Mhm.
Well, let's talk about our last type of courts, and that is the ecclesiastical court.
Yep. So the ecclesiastical court basically dealt with matters related to the Church of England. So every 3 to 4 years, a bishop would visit a diocese and basically address any court matters that were submitted by the parish church wardens. And sometimes, if a diocese was too populated, like London, then you'd have a commissary court handle the proceedings. So if you see a title that says commissary court, that means it's held by the commissary court assigned from a bishop. If you see a consistory court, that means that it was presided over by the bishop himself. And then any locations outside the bishop's jurisdiction was called a peculiar court. So ecclesiastical court records, you'll find different records related again specifically to the church. So any violence against clergymen, defamation and perjury, adultery and illegitimacy, marriage licenses, professional licenses, tithes, and also wills and probates, which we had discussed just earlier. So yeah, again, these are records that are, aside from the wills and probates and like adultery and illegitimacy, most of the records are related directly to the Church of England. But to find these records, just determine the name of the court your ancestor's parish belonged to. Again, using that Family Search map site, and then go to the Family Search catalog and search for that court name. Search it using the court name ecclesiastical court, and then you'll get specifically the records that Family Search has for that ecclesiastical court. And some are also held at the archives of the parish's respective county. So yeah, it's a really good court. Your ancestor's name might pop up again for in terms of like wills or marriage licenses or adultery instances. So yeah, it's last but definitely not least. It's a very large court.
I think it's so interesting for all of these to find them. You're recommending we go to the Family Search catalog and search for that specific name in the keyword field. Because often I just go to the place, then I go down and look under court records. But it sounds like this is perhaps a better way to search using the keyword. Is that what you have found?
Yes, because if you're searching, say, for your ancestor's parish, then a lot of times court records won't pop up because the court records belonged to a larger court that involved a ton of different parishes, not just your parish. So you're likely not going to necessarily get that court name if you search just in the Family Search catalog only for your parish. And if you search for the larger like county, just everything that's under the county, you're going to get tons and tons and tons of of hits that you have to sift through to find the right court. So I've always found it more efficient to use something like Family Search Maps to get the specific court name, and then you can plug that in and just very quickly see what records are available for that court that your parish was a part of.
Oh, that's such a great tip. Thank you.
Wow, it makes me want to always click that link in the Family Search catalog that says part of, and then gives you a larger jurisdiction that it's part of.
Yeah, those are always worth investigating.
Okay, we're moving on to another record type that I know absolutely nothing about, so I'm excited to learn about this. Tell us, what are Manor Rolls?
Yeah, so these are definitely less known, but they're so important for people who are trying to break past that 1538 year. So people familiar with English research, 1538 was when Henry VIII's mandate took effect, basically saying that all the Church of England parishes needed to document the baptisms, marriages, and burials that took place in their parish. So before that year, before 1538, there was no obligation to record those things, and a lot of religious denominations just simply didn't. So without the parish records that we are just so reliant on in the 1800s, 1700s, 1600s, basically one of the most essential records for before that year, before 1538, are manor rolls. They are records pertaining to a given estate, because everything back, in the 1500s and earlier, property and rule of law would often revolve around the estate that your ancestor was part of. Basically, they are the most reliable resource if you want to look for your ancestor before 1538. So, yeah, the estate manor was the unit of local administration. And so, yeah, it's going to have its own court proceedings. It's going to have its own taxes. It's really going to capture the day-to-day life of the estate's inhabitants. And it's going to provide the most useful information about your family. So, what you can find within the manor rolls is specifically the manor court papers. The manor court, its duty was to regulate the responsibilities and relationships between the manor lord, his steward and bailiff, and the estate's inhabitants. So the manor lord acted both as the landlord and like the landowner and the judiciary for his own estate. So he or she would oversee matters such as rental fees, elections of local officials, land surveys, and so on. So he was the landowner and he was the judge. So there was two different types of courts that were held within a manor. There's the court leet and the court baron. So court leet would handle basically criminal cases. So assaults, petty crime, poaching, those things that would occur on the estate manor. After the 17th century, this court started to decline in importance, and that was taken over by the justices of the peace. So post 1600s, you start getting other courts like the Assize Court handling crimes. But before that, the court leet of the local manor was responsible for hearing criminal cases. And then the other court, court baron, that was the court that handled land transfers, tenant services, disputes between tenants, disputes between the tenants and the manor lord. So basically, land transactions and the less severe cases were heard by court baron. So this is probably where you're going to get some good information for your ancestor if they transferred their land or if they were involved in any disputes. This would be a great place to look for your ancestor. So records for both court leet and court baron are held in the same collection, usually often together, for their respective manor. And we'll talk about how to find these manor rolls in a little bit, but when you get your hands on like a digital copy of the manor roll, typically it begins with a date, the type of court held, whether it's court leet or court baron, and then the name of the lord and steward of the estate. And it should be noted that if a tenant who owned or rented property, if they died, their heir would appear in court and pay a fee to the manor lord to take over that property. So that's a really great way to piece together earlier generations, because oftentimes property would pass from father to son, from one generation to the next. So if you're seeing your ancestor coming and wishing to pay the fee to take over the land from so-and-so with the same surname, then that's probably an earlier generation. And that's a way you can build your ancestry back during medieval times where you don't have those parish registers available. So it's a great way to build your tree going back into the 1500s, 1400s, even 1300s.
It's amazing that those are even available and that we can go that far back in England.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, you hinted that you're going to tell us how to find these and what to do with them as we're trying to do our research.
Yes. So basically, you have to start out with knowing the parish where your ancestor lived. And then if you've got that, then you can go onto the National Archives website. Again, this is the British National Archives. And they have a database called the Manor Documents Register. And Manor is, of course, MANOR. So Manor Documents Register is a database where you can type in a specific parish, and maybe you need to do like parish and the county that it's in. It will give you a list of estates that would have covered that parish, and if those estates have records that still exist. I'll throw out an example. I had recently typed in Stukely Parish in Buckinghamshire, and the results I got was that that parish was covered by 4 manorial estates. It was Fowler's Manor, Stukely Grange Manor, and Littlecote Manor, and Stukely Manor. So there's definitely records out there. And so it kind of raises the question of, okay, if this parish was covered by 4 manorial estates, like which estate did my ancestor belong to? And that's where locating like early county maps and contacting local archives who have a better idea of how those estates were laid out can give you a good idea of like which manor is the most relevant for your research. It's really great to get in touch and to just figure that out. But if your parish only falls under one manor, the Manor Documents Register database provides a list of surviving records for that manor and the archives where they're held, along with even a reference number. So you can contact that archives with a reference number and see if you can get your hands on a copy of those manor rolls. And alternatively, manor rolls are often held by county archives or trusts or the National Archives. And sometimes it requires like contacting staff or making an in-person visit. Sometimes these things haven't been digitized and it requires you going in person to see these things. But you should be able to glean all that information through the Manor Documents Register database. It's kind of hit and miss. Not all estates from medieval England have surviving manor rolls, but that database on the National Archives is a great way to find out whether or not records exist for the estate that your ancestor would have lived on, and just how accessible those records are. It may be that you need to hire a local genealogist to go retrieve those manor rolls for you, because sometimes manor rolls are held by a trust or by a private third party, and they're not necessarily available to the public. But again, you can get all that information through the National Archives. You should be able to. If you get your hands on a copy of a manor roll, then congratulations. But also, it's important to know that up until 1732, most manor rolls were recorded in Latin because that was the language of record back in that time. Fortunately, you don't need to be fluent in Latin to know what these records say necessarily, but you should familiarize yourself with common terms and phrases that would have been used in manor court documents. And fortunately, there are glossaries of manor terms and Latin terms that manor court records would have used, and those are easily accessible online. If you clear the first hurdle of procuring a manor roll, and then the second hurdle of getting some good Latin glossaries and familiarizing yourself with the most common terms, the third final hurdle is that the manor rolls were also written in secretary hand, which is a writing style used by English scribes in the 15th to 17th centuries. There are tutorials online that can teach you how to read secretary hand, but Diana, you mentioned popping in that earlier will into an AI database. I'd actually like to hear more about that because it's possible that it might be able to translate something that's in secretary hand, possibly.
Oh, I bet you anything that it can. In fact, I'm thinking that maybe Transcribus would have a model for that. I haven't checked that, but Transcribus has models for all sorts of different languages and different time periods.
Yes.
So that would be fabulous, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I've never tried that, but I would be very intrigued. Reach out to us, basically, if anyone who comes across a Manor Roll and tries Transcribus, we would love to hear your experience.
AI is opening up research for us in so many places that we were daunted, like this one. If it could help us to read that really old writing in a different language, how fabulous.
Yeah, that would be so amazing.
Wow, my mind has been blown this episode. Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, of course.
I think we're all just dying to take our family lines back through these manor courts. Wow.
Yeah, I think it's so tempting to just sort of throw your hands up in the air when you hit that like 1538 mark and be like, okay, well, I can't do anything now because there's no parish records. It's definitely more difficult and you're not going to get as much information necessarily, but it's not impossible. There are definitely tools and ways that you can try to continue pushing your ancestry back.
For sure. And combining this with Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA tests can really bring about some cool results, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a whole nother topic.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you for doing this series. Everyone listening, if you want to review what you've learned here, definitely read Jessica's blog posts. There are 5 in the series that talk about all of these different record groups beyond the basics of birth, marriage, and death records in England. So take a look at those and you'll see some examples of the records we talked about too. So you can see some images of the originals on the blog posts.
And I highly recommend Ancestral Trails by Mark T. Herber is a really great resource, especially in talking about Manor Rolls and the use it has in doing British genealogy. So yeah, a very, very good resource. There are a lot of really good resources out there.
Well, you've given us a jump start on researching in England without the things we're used to. So thank you so much for being on the podcast, and thank you for writing the fabulous blog posts.
Of course. Thank you for having me today.
All right, everyone. We'll talk to you again next week. Have a good week. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. We hope that something you heard today will help you make progress in your research. If you want to learn more, purchase our books, Research Like a Pro and Research Like a Pro with DNA on Amazon.com and other booksellers. You can also register for our online courses or study groups of the same names. Learn more at familylocket.com/services. To share your progress and ask questions, join our private Facebook group by sending us your book receipt or joining our courses. To get updates in your email inbox each Monday, subscribe to our newsletter at familylocket.com/newsletter. Please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. We read each review and are so thankful for them. We hope you'll start now to research like a pro.